What if the story of human ancestry has been told backwards? Textbooks draw a clean line. Humans leave Africa, migrate through Arabia, mix with Neanderthals, and spread into Europe and Asia. A straight path, a clear timeline. But Bedouin DNA doesn't follow that line. It bends it, breaks it, and buries something deeper under the sand. Because hidden in the blood of Arabia's desert dwellers is a code older than civilization itself. Not just older than Mesopotamia, older than Sumer or Babylon, older than writing. When scientists sequenced the Bedouin genome, expecting to find the usual traces of Neanderthal ancestry seen in almost every non-African group, they found something else. A void. The lowest Neanderthal admixture of any West Eurasian population. That's not a footnote. That's a seismic break. It means Bedouins didn't just leave Africa later. They may have split from all other non-Africans before the Neanderthal mixing ever happened. Possibly 60,000 years ago. In 2015, the Qatar Genome Project confirmed it. Among indigenous Bedouins, a unique signal kept surfacing. A population cluster so ancient, so isolated, that researchers began calling it Basal Eurasian, a mysterious group not seen in pure form anywhere else, except here. The implications are massive. If this is true, if Bedouins really descend from one of the earliest Eurasian populations, then Arabia wasn't just a highway for migration. It was a homeland, a green, habitable land during ancient humid periods, a place where early humans could survive and evolve, while the rest of the world froze. But here's the mystery that still haunts every lab result. If they didn't mix with Neanderthals, then who did they live among? Were there other human groups, now extinct, that never made it into history books? Or was this the last surviving fragment of a human chapter we've never even written? Because to answer that, we have to go deeper into Arabia, where the DNA is ancient. But the migrations haven't stopped whispering. But while the land preserved their blood, the tribes reshaped their names. The Arabian Peninsula. To most, it's a barren corridor, a place people pass through, not a place they began. But what if that idea is completely backwards? In 2011, something was found, buried in the stone outcrops of Jebel Faya, UAE, a set of hand axes, flakes, scrapers, tools almost identical to what early humans made in East Africa. And the dating, not 10,000 years ago, not even 50,000, but 125,000 years ago. That discovery shattered everything, because it meant humans were already in Arabia long before we thought they could be, long before Europe had even seen a Homo sapiens skull. And it wasn't just a one-time event. According to climate data, Arabia didn't used to be dry. During marine isotope stage 5, from 130,000 to 80,000 years ago, monsoons turned this land green, rivers flowing through the deserts, lakes pooling in the valleys. This was a world where humans could thrive. Satellite scans of ancient lake beds, fossilized footprints near Al-Wusta, Saudi Arabia, dated to approximately 90,000 years ago. Bones of hippos and elephants, animals that can only survive where there's water, not sand. Arabia wasn't a corridor, it was a cradle, and something else. The stone tools found in Oman, in Dhofar, they carry the signature of the Nubian complex, an East African technology. Not just similar, identical. That means the people who came here didn't just pass through, they brought culture, memory, identity. Then came the desert, the drying, the isolation. Tribes split, villages vanished. But the DNA stayed, locked inside small endogamous communities, preserved not in scrolls or stories, but in bloodlines. Bedouins who never left, families who married inward again and again, unknowingly guarding the oldest Eurasian genome. So when the modern world came looking for human origins, it looked everywhere else. Europe, the Levant, the Himalayas. It never expected the answer was sitting in tents, riding camels, walking over bones older than kings. But even inside that preserved blood, something shifted. A mystery not in where they lived, but in what they called themselves. Because if Arabia held the roots of humanity, then who decided what made a tribe and what made a stranger? Because names lie, blood doesn't. In the desert where stories are carried in songs and lineages are guarded like gold, there is one code that cuts deeper than myth. It's not a flag or a language or a god. It's a marker, silent, invisible, passed from father to son, and it's everywhere. J1-M267. Across the Arabian Peninsula, from the highlands of Yemen to the sands of Najd, from the Negev's dry valleys to the borders of ancient Edom. This single Y chromosome haplogroup dominates the male lines of the Bedouin. In some tribes, like the Ajman, the Awazim, it reaches over 85%. That's not chance. That's ancestry, echoing through millennia. But here's the catch. This lineage isn't tied to Islam, or the Prophet, or the 7th century Arab conquests. J1's genetic clock, based on coalescent analysis and YSTR divergence, places its origin far earlier, 12,000 to 16,000 years ago. That's Neolithic Arabia, before writing, before Abraham, before even Sumer built its first ziggurat. J1 is thought to have spread with early pastoralists, goat and sheep herders moving across the Fertile Crescent as the Ice Age thawed. Some link it to the Epa-Paleolithic revolutions of the Levant, a time when humans began taming land and the idea of tribe began to harden into bloodline. And then came the genealogies, the Cottonites of the south, the Adnanites of the north. Mythologized in Islamic historiography, traced by chroniclers like Ibn al-Kalbi and al-Tabari, these divisions shaped the Arab imagination, but in the genome they blur. Because J1 runs through both, binding lineages that were once told as rivals. It's a strange kind of royalty, one without crowns, carried not by kings but by herders and poets, smugglers and warriors. And yet, it's only part of the story, because not all Bedouins carry this royal code. Some carry something older, stranger. A signal not from the Levant, but from somewhere unexpected, a tribal line that breaks all rules and holds the map to a forgotten migration. Because if the men's lines tell stories of war, the women's DNA speaks of migration and survival. But before we get to the mothers, there's one more twist in the story of the fathers, and it begins with a tribe that shouldn't exist, the Awazim. Fierce, proud, deeply rooted in Arabian soil, or so the stories go. But inside their Y chromosomes, something unexpected. Frequencies of haplogroup R2, rare in Arabia, more common in South Asia. And E-M123, a North African and Levantine signal. These aren't markers of local drift, they're signatures of movement, of fusion. How did this happen? History leaves fingerprints, and the Arabian Peninsula has always stood at the crossroads of conquest. From the Ottoman era to Mamluk military campaigns between the 14th and 18th centuries, tribal alliances were forged not just with blood, but with battle. Some Bedouin warriors were conscripted, others enslaved, some migrated, east to Persia, west to Egypt, or north into the Caucasus. The Muter and Shamar tribes show it clearly. Genomic studies reveal admixture from Central Asia, even the southern Caucasus. It's not just myth, it's biology. These were once warrior clans who followed Ottoman banners, rode with Mamluks, traded camels for muskets, and the genes they brought back? Proof of those distant roads, and here's the irony. These same tribes, who fiercely defend their ancestral purity, carry the most genetically diverse Y-DNA profiles in the region. Oral genealogies preserved their names, but their blood kept the truth. The desert doesn't forget. The Awazims R2 may trace to forgotten Indian mercenaries. Their EM123 may echo Berber merchants or Levantine captives. Each haplogroup, a fossil of a life once lived and lost. But those are the stories of men, war stories, bloodlines marked by swords and survival. What about the women? What about the lineages passed quietly, mother to daughter, and across caravans through marriages beneath veils? Because buried in the mitochondria of Bedouin mothers is a map of migrations the history books never told. But this blending comes at a cost, one written in the genome itself. The men carried the banners, but the women carried the world. Deep inside the Bedouin genome, the mitochondrial DNA, passed only from mother to child, holds a record no chronicler ever wrote down. A whisper of journeys never honored, never named. And when scientists decoded this maternal line, they didn't find a single thread. They found a woven tapestry, haplogroup L3, tied to East Africa, common among Nubian, Somali, and Ethiopian women. L2, linked to the Bantu expansion and the old kingdoms of Mali and Ghana. H and J, ancient lineages of the Levant, born from the hills of Palestine and the highlands of Anatolia. M, N, and R0A, signals from India, Persia, the Horn of Africa. And none of this is theoretical. In 2021, genomic analysis of Saudi and Kuwaiti Bedouin women confirmed that over 20% of their maternal ancestry traced back to sub-Saharan Africa. R0A1, one of Arabia's most dominant female haplogroups, was shown to originate in Yemen and is strongly associated with Neolithic expansions across Arabia, Oman, and Ethiopia. How did these mothers arrive? Between the 9th and 19th centuries, the Indian Ocean slave trade moved an estimated 4 million African women across the Red Sea and into Arabia. Others came as pilgrims, traders, or refugees, absorbed into the fabric of Bedouin society without ever becoming its authors. They didn't leave written stories, but their genes remain, quietly anchoring Bedouin women to 3 continents. Unlike Y-DNA, which narrows through centuries of male tribal endogamy, mtDNA expands. It remembers, it is accepted, it connects. But in that openness lies the paradox. Because while maternal diversity paints a map of global connections, the practice of cousin marriage, clan loyalty, and isolation has also created closed loops, genomic bottlenecks, and in those loops, recessive mutations begin to echo, not just ancestry but pathology, a legacy where ancient strength meets modern risk, because inside those same families where mothers carried the world, the children began inheriting something else, something silent, invisible, and sometimes fatal. But can science rewrite these genetic legacies without erasing cultural pride? It begins in love, in tradition, in promises whispered between cousins bound not just by affection, but by ancestry. Among the Bedouin, marriage is more than union. It's preservation of land, of lineage, of legacy. But in that devotion lies a hidden danger. In some Bedouin sub-tribes, 60 to 70% of marriages are between first cousins. It's called consanguinity, a word that sounds sterile until you see what it does. Recessive genes, once harmless, begin to repeat, and when they do, they break things. In the Negev, Israel, one 2019 study revealed something haunting. Whole clans carrying the same mutation for hereditary retardation dysmorphism syndrome, traced back to a single founder just a few generations ago. Another case in Jordan linked 50% of affected families with congenital blood disorders to a common male ancestor buried in a remote desert village. These aren't isolated stories. In southern Saudi Arabia, maple syrup urine disease, Bardet beetle syndrome, and Carmi syndrome show up with shocking frequency. Not because of outside infection, but because the same blood keeps meeting itself in the next generation. And here's the pain. These aren't just medical reports. These are children, sons who never walk, daughters who never speak, families forced to choose between honoring the tribe or breaking the chain. Doctors offer solutions: carrier screening, premarital counseling, genetic maps. In Qatar, mandatory testing began as early as 2009. Saudi Arabia followed. Clinics now run full autosomal panels matching not just diseases, but tribal histories. But resistance lingers, because in these societies where honor is tribal and pride is generational, asking someone to test their blood can feel like asking them to doubt their ancestors. So the question isn't just scientific, it's cultural, political, spiritual. Can a community accept the future without feeling it has betrayed the past? Because in some corners of Arabia, modern medicine is knocking. But tradition still holds the key. But science also disrupts something deeper: the tribal myths of origin. For over 1,000 years, tribal identity wasn't a theory. It was law. It determined who you could marry, who you could trust, who you were. Lineages were recited like scripture, father to son, son to grandson, back to legendary ancestors like Khatan and Adnan. But then came a force no poetry could outsing: data. In 2004, Saudi Arabia initiated one of the Middle East's boldest experiments: the National Premarital Screening Program. On paper, it was simple: test for hereditary diseases before marriage. In reality, it was a quiet revolution. Qatar followed in 2009, fusing the program with one of the most ambitious genomic studies in the world, the Qatar Genome Program. By 2021, they had sequenced over 6,000 complete genomes, many of them from isolated Bedouin populations. And that's when the myths began to crack. In one tribe, anonymized for protection, a devastating neurodegenerative disorder had paralyzed generation after generation. 22 diagnosed cases in under 30 years. The geneticists traced it to a single ancestral couple married just 4 generations ago. Through testing, education, and careful marriage planning, they brought that number down to 3 cases in 1 decade. But the real battle wasn't medical. It was cultural. Families feared being labeled impure. Elders resisted, not because they hated science, but because they feared it would unravel sacred lineage. To tell a family that their ancestry isn't what they thought is to unsettle the foundation of identity itself. So the strategy shifted. Tribal physicians were trained in genomics. Religious scholars issued fatwas supporting testing. Counseling centers were built inside mosques and desert clinics, where DNA wasn't an outsider's tool, but a community safeguard. Still, every test revealed new tensions. A revered family in Najd, believed to be pure Quatanite, showed genetic signals tied to the Caucasus and East Africa. Another clan with a prestigious Adnanite lineage carried Y-DNA markers from R2A common in South Asia. These revelations weren't just scientific, they were emotional, disorienting. Because if your blood tells a different story than your tribe, who are you? And more importantly, who gets to decide? For centuries, Arab identity has rested on a single tree. One trunk, two great branches, Qahtan and Adnan. The southern Arabs, sons of Qahtan tied to Yemen and the ancient kingdom of Saba. The northern Arabs, sons of Adnan linked to Ishmael, son of Abraham, the ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad. Every tribe, every surname, every honor claimed a place on that tree. But the genome refuses to follow the branches. When geneticists sequenced the Y chromosomes of Arab tribes across Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, they expected a divide. Two distinct lines, north and south, Adnan and Qahtan. But what they found was the same signal pulsing through both. J1-M267, the Bedouin marker, runs through tribes on both sides of the myth. Qahtani tribes in Najran, Hadramaut, and Al-Mahra carry it. So do Adnani tribes in Hijaz, Najd, and Mecca. No clean split, no genetic border, just a web of bloodlines. That contradicts the oldest story Arabs tell about themselves. The problem isn't the existence of J1, it's the timeline. The Qahtan-Adnan divide entered Arab literature around the 7th to 9th century CE, with scholars like Ibn al-Kalbi, al-Tabari, and Ibn Hisham codifying it into pre-Islamic history. But the J1 line is much older, radiating outward from the Arabian Peninsula 12,000 to 16,000 years ago, tied to Epipaleolithic herders and Neolithic settlers. This means the tribes believed to descend from Abraham may actually predate him by over 10,000 years. And here lies the tension. The oral tradition tells us who we think we are. The genome tells us where we really came from. So when the stories of ancestors don't match the science, do we rewrite our legends? Or do we deny the data? Because this contradiction isn't just about Arab identity, it opens a door far wider, one that could reshape everything we believe about who the first non-Africans really were. But what happens when we follow this signal further, across the sea to Soqotra and Hadramaut? Because inside Bedouin DNA, especially in the most isolated tribes of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the Negev, scientists uncovered something astonishing, a population signature, ancient, elusive, that doesn't fit with anything else in Eurasia. It's called Basal Eurasian, and it doesn't follow any known migration route. First reported in 2014 by Lazaridis et al. In the Nature study on ancient Near Eastern DNA, this component diverged before the major out-of-Africa populations mixed with Neanderthals, around 55,000 to 60,000 years ago. That's before Homo sapiens even stepped foot into Europe. And yet, it's strongest in modern Arabian populations, specifically among the Qatari Bedouins, Negev Arabs, and some Yemeni highland groups. Unlike Europeans, East Asians, or even most Levantine Arabs, these groups show almost no Neanderthal DNA. Instead, they hold a purer signal, a ghost from a forgotten split in our species tree. This suggests something radical. Arabia wasn't just a bridge, it was a refugium. During the harshest parts of the Ice Age, particularly marine isotope stage 4, 71,000 to 57,000 BCE, much of the northern hemisphere became uninhabitable. But paleoclimate evidence from lakes in Rub al-Khali and the Dhofar region shows Arabia had seasonal monsoons, freshwater springs, and even savanna-like ecosystems. Here, in this oasis of survival, the Basal Eurasians may have endured, hidden, unmixed. And when other groups moved north, interbreeding with Neanderthals in the Levant and Europe, this population stayed behind, isolated, preserved, until now, when DNA tests pulled them back into the light. It's not just rare, it's foundational. This lineage may be the deepest non-African branch of Homo sapiens still alive, a group that never left Arabia even when the rest of the world changed. But here's the twist. This signal doesn't only appear in the Bedouins of the inland desert. It pulses even stronger across the sea, in the islanders of Soqotra and the valleys of Hadramaut in southern Yemen. And if the same ghost lives there too, then maybe the roots of Eurasia weren't planted in Mesopotamia or Anatolia, but in the rocky shores of the Arabian Sea. The desert has told one story. The ocean is waiting to tell the next. Because beyond Arabia's dunes, past the windswept cliffs of Hadramaut and the salt-bitten docks of Aden, lies an island that should never have existed. Soqotra, cut off yet never isolated, remote yet never forgotten. Its language, unrelated, its trees, found nowhere else, and its people, a living mosaic, not of conquest, but of currents. Genetic studies from 2021 revealed something almost mythic. R0A1A, the maternal haplogroup linked to Neolithic Yemeni women, still survives in Soqotri lineages. But it's not alone. There's M1A from East Africa, L3F from Central Africa, and coastal traces of Indian and Malay ancestry, all encoded into the island's fishermen, merchants, and elders. It's not a melting pot, it's an archive. This is where Arabia's DNA meets the ocean's memory. Because long before Europe's age of exploration, long before ships flew Portuguese or Dutch flags, Arabian dhows rode the monsoon winds, south from Oman, east to Gujarat, west to Lamu. And those winds didn't just carry incense, spices, and pearls. They carried bloodlines. And if the Hadrami diaspora still remembers those tides in Hyderabad, Mombasa, and Surabaya, then perhaps Arabia's greatest story isn't written in stone, but in salt water. So here's the question that haunts the shoreline. What if the first humans to circle the globe didn't walk, but sailed? If that idea stirs something in you, something older than maps, deeper than names, then stay with us. Because we've followed the trail through the sands. Next, we follow the tide and the genome. It's already pulling us toward the shore.